Smith, Porter had the look of a man with a crime on his mind. He was also allowed to repeat a statement that an inflammatory statement that he had made to Pope when Smith returned to Pope's camp. Smith testified, "I told General Pope that I was so certain that Fitz John Porter was a traitor, I would shoot him that night, as far as any crime against heaven were concerned, if the law of man would allow it." Smith also testified that when he first got back to camp, the very first thing he did was to have his tent pitched so he could make himself comfortable. But then, right after that, he went off to get himself a meal. And it was only after those essentials had been taken care of did Smith wander over to General Pope to say, "Oh, by the way, your left flank is in the hands of a traitor who I think should be shot." That's the kind of nonsense that was used to convict Porter. And we know that because in a post-trial report to Lincoln, summarizing the proceedings for basically a recommendation to Lincoln, Holt heavily relied on this guy. Our favorite Manassas general, Irvin McDowell, testified, and he gave testimony harmful to Porter, which hurt Porter. I don't mean just legally, but Porter thought that McDowell was his friend. But as I said, McDowell's own career was in jeopardy, and he clearly was willing to throw Porter under the bus because on cross-examination, McDowell developed what I would call selective amnesia. Anytime he was asked a question where the honest answer would help Porter, he would say, "I don't remember. I don't recall. I can't say. I couldn't be sure." Very selective. Remember that principle I told you about? Now, Porter's counsel finally ended the cross, probably thinking, okay, I've undermined his credibility at least by showing his amnesia is quite selective. Well, maybe the court thought so too, because the very next day, McDowell was recalled to the witness stand, not by Porter's counsel, not by Holt, but by the court. And a court member proceeded to lob a series of softball questions at McDowell, perhaps to restore his credibility, but also apparently to plug holes that the court member had perceived were being punched in the prosecution's case. He asking questions the prosecutor hadn't even thought to ask McDowell. Porter would later write that at this point in the proceedings, a member of the court essentially assumed the attitude of the prosecution. We don't know who it is. It probably was Garfield, but nobody says. But despite all these handicaps, I think Porter's counsel was doing an incredible job, and apparently somebody else was worried about that too, because in the middle of the trial, presiding Judge Hunter starts grumbling. It's on the record. He complains, "This trial is taking too long. It's being stretched out, and I know why. It's this extended cross-examination that's being engaged in by counsel for the accused." Can you imagine that? Defense counsel is doing his job. So Hunter announces, "The court is desirous of returning to the usual and customary mode of practice, meaning that the accused will question his own witnesses." Porter's no lawyer. Stripping him of his trained counsel at this point would cripple his defense, which was clearly the point. Porter objected. He had been promised he could use professional counsel in his defense. It's a capital offense, by the way, a capital case. The court was unmoved. Unmoved, that is, until Porter cleverly pointed out, okay, you really want to go back to the usual and customary way of practice? I will insist, after each witness testifies, I get the normal benefit of having time to go back and write out my questions longhand and then have somebody read them to the witness. That's going to take a lot longer than if you allow my trained counsel to commence cross-examination promptly upon the completion of the direct. Caught in the illogic of their position, the court backed down. That's the one time they ruled in favor of Porter. And I have to suspect they got together and said, no, this looks really bad. Let's not do this. The prosecution's case ended with the presentation of the telegrams. And here too, I think you could say there was unfairness. Porter's counsel objected, not to the telegrams, because Porter did write them. But the defense counsel said to the court, there are other telegrams. Holt is only showing you what he cherry picks. There are other telegrams that provide important context to what Holt's showing you. And there are other telegrams that provide really exculpatory material. We've asked for copies of all the telegrams and Holt won't give them to us. In response to this clear prosecutorial misconduct, the court kind of yawned. And then when Porter's counsel tried to introduce a couple of the telegrams that they did have copies of, the court excluded them, said, oh, they're not relevant. They did allow Porter to introduce one telegram. And surprisingly, it was a copy of a telegram that Holt had introduced. Just the small problem that Porter's telegram copy showed that Holt had altered the text of what he was using to make Porter look bad. Now, confronted with this obvious prosecutorial misconduct, the court yawned twice, essentially. Didn't even ask Holt what gives. Now, we don't have time to go into Porter's defense. Suffice it to say, it was vigorous. He presented many witnesses, but I do want to touch on one key witness, Lieutenant Colonel Frederick Locke. Locke was a member of Porter's staff. Locke testified that he was sent by Porter to carry a message to General Rufus King. And that after he delivered the message, General Irvin McDowell, who happened to be with King, gave Locke a message to take back to Porter. McDowell's message was, give my compliments to General Porter. Tell him I think he had better stay where he is, but if necessary for him to fall back, he can do so on my left. That's bombshell testimony for Porter, because McDowell outranks Porter. And while framed in polite terms, McDowell's message is an order. Stay where you are. In other words, do not attack. Locke's testimony, if believed, goes a tremendous way to exonerating Porter from all the serious charges. So clearly, from the government's perspective, Locke's credibility has to be destroyed. Now, Holt cross-examines Locke, doesn't get anywhere. You read Locke's testimony, it's clear, it's direct, he provides detail, it has the ring of truth. Holt recalls Irvin McDowell, and you know what he needs from McDowell. It's very simple. What he wants General McDowell to say is, Locke's lying. I never said that. That's all he needs. But here, McDowell's peculiar manner of testifying actually helps Porter. Because McDowell, he goes into, I've thought about this and I've thought about this, and I don't think it happened. I don't remember it happening. That's not good enough. The court starts peppering McDowell with questions. Clearly, they want, come on, you know what you're supposed to say. The closest they get is the last question one of them asked McDowell. And the question is, are you confident whether or not you had such a conversation with Lieutenant Colonel Locke? Now, McDowell's answer on the cold transcripts, as we lawyers say, it just doesn't come through with the tone that I speculate, but I am confident this is how McDowell talks. If you read enough of his testimony and his back and forth, and I don't know, I think this is how he answered. Question, are you confident, and I'm going to quote his answer, are you confident whether or not you had such a conversation with Lieutenant Colonel Locke? I don't think so. But Holt has another string to his bow. Obviously, the key conversation is between McDowell and Locke. But Locke had mentioned that General King, Rufus King, was present for this conversation. At this point in the trial, where is General King? Pardon?
It's a member of the.
You're the first one who remembers that, even though I keep saying, remember that name. Thank you. King is on the court. Holt calls General King off the court and turns him into a fact witness. And King promptly says, "Look, I never saw that guy in my life." And McDowell never gave any such message or order. Now Porter's got a problem. Porter's counsel has a problem. What are you going to do? Call a member of the court a liar? They tried a flank attack, as I would call it, which should have generated good results. They asked King to confirm, which I think probably everybody in the courtroom already knew, that in the days leading up to this alleged conversation, August 29, King had been very ill. He had been very ill. King suffered from epilepsy. And it's pretty clear that in the days leading up to the first day of the battle, King had suffered multiple epileptic seizures. One of those days, he spent the whole day traveling in an ambulance being treated by his division surgeon. Another day, Bronner's Farm, his division is attacked by a portion of Jackson's force. Things are not going well. One of his officers is going looking for King for orders. Can't find him. Turns out, as later reported, King had gotten off his horse in the middle of the battle and was lying flat on his back with his arms outstretched. People around thought he's been shot. He hadn't been shot. Then they thought, oh my God, he's drunk. No, I don't think he was drunk either. I think he was having an epileptic fit. In fact, his condition was so bad that at the time Locke spoke to King on the 29th, this exchange of messages, King was no longer with his division because he had relinquished command because he was in no condition. And Porter's counsel, they really didn't bring that out as much as I think they should have, but they did have King confirm that at this stage of the battle, he was not with his division. He had relinquished control because he was sick. So you see where Porter's counsel is going. They're not going to get King to say he's lying. What they want King to say is, yes, I agree. I was in such a physical and fuzzy mental condition. It's possible I am mistaken. I don't think I am, but it's possible. King won't do it. He doubles down, says, I'm sure, and he sinks Porter. And Holt very much used King's testimony in his post-trial report to Lincoln. Now, was King lying? I don't know. I do know he had an incentive to lie, and that he never should have been on that court. So he's testified, he's now a fact witness. Does he go home? No, of course not. He goes right back on the bench and participates in the remaining proceedings and in the deliberations. So if you're on the court and you're deliberating and the credibility of Locke comes up, and you start, as a judge, you start to say, Locke sounded awfully. Hey, calling King a liar? No, not going to happen. The final unfairness came with closing arguments. It was well established that as a matter of fundamental fairness, the accused always gets the last word. So naturally, the court says to Porter's counsel, you give your closing argument first. So Holt gets to hear the whole thing before he has to respond. And then Holt, somewhat surprisingly, says, I'll waive my oral argument. What he did was, he put his closing argument, I think I said wrong, he put his closing argument, Holt did, in a private post-trial report to Lincoln, which is confidential. Porter's counsel doesn't get to see it, let alone respond to it. And in his post-trial report, it's very inflammatory, it refers to the telegrams. It's filled with half-truths, at least one outright lie. However, you will be happy to know that Holt at least did assure Lincoln that the trial had been scrupulously fair. And I want to give Holt his due. Holt wrote, "The court was not only patient and just, but liberal. And in the end, everything was received in evidence which could possibly tend to place the accused in its true light. It is not believed that there remains upon the record a single ruling of the court to which exception could be seriously taken." Holt's assurance would be comical, but for the consequences that are about to come down on Porter's head. Lincoln reads the post-trial report. He's predictably inflamed, and he signs the order approving the findings and the sentence of the court-martial, and made Fitz John Porter the last casualty of Second Manassas. Thank you. There we go. Dreyfus. Any questions?
Quick question. He was reinstated in rank. Did he get back pay?
Good question. No. No. He had to make political deals. It was hard enough to get Congress to approve his reinstatement. He had to give up back pay. It would have been a lot. I can't remember his real name, but
Oh, yeah,
John Logan, General Logan. He was, I forget if he was in the Senate or the House, but he was one of the leading opponents for years against Porter being reinstated. His friend Grant even said, "Would you lighten up?" And he said no. It was good politics to go after Porter. And he was an implacable enemy in Congress against Porter. At the very end, when the legislation is moving forward, and it appears that it is going to win, Logan tried one last attempt. He introduced an amendment that any Union soldier who had lost a limb or an eye at Second Manassas get a special pension, and he made some crack about, if we're going to make possibly somebody like Porter eligible for a pension, let's at least give one to those who did fight for their country. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Who was Porter's attorney? Was he military or civilian?
Civilian. He had two. John Ames was a well-known, nationally known trial lawyer, and Reverend D. Johnson, who's probably a familiar name. Reverend D. Johnson was a well-known conservative Democrat from Maryland. He had been Attorney General of the United States. I forget under which president. He was, what's that? Buchanan. Okay. And he had represented Dred Scott's alleged owner in the Supreme Court case. And at the time he is representing Porter, he's on the verge, he's been elected by the legislature, he's on the verge of taking a US Senate seat from Maryland. So he was a big shot. Yes. Ladies first.
Could you please talk about how the result of the trial turned Porter into a seared soul, and how your takeaway from the whole procedure was that Porter should have always protected his rear?
Oh, did I say that in the podcast? I'm somewhat else. Well, I don't know if that's relevant. Yeah, Porter, 23 years before he's reinstated. And for the rest of his life, he's still sane. The comment Kathy is referring to probably comes from Porter dies, I think, in 1901. And there's I forget his name, Otto something. He has a biographer early on, and the biographer interviews Porter's daughter. And it's so sad. The daughter said that her father would come home, he would, he'd have dinner pretty much in silence. He might play chess with her brother, and then he would typically go upstairs and work on his case, gathering information, writing letters. She said that after he was convicted, for the rest of his life, she never saw her father smile. And that's really sad. And protecting his rear, AOP, I think we all know, pretty much a cesspool of politics. But the telegrams didn't help.
What started the animosity between, Porter and Pope in the very beginning, before the battle started, before the telegrams? What, was there some event that triggered?
He just didn't like Pope. He didn't respect him. He did not like the hard war policy. I don't, and I think I may look into this. I don't know if they specifically clashed pre-war. I know that early on, Pope was griping, like 1861 or so, maybe 1860. Pope was griping because Porter had been promoted to Major General, even though Pope had seniority in the old army, and he was publicly griping about that. He was very ambitious. Yes, sir.
Was there any avenue for him to appeal?
No,
No. Okay.
no. Court martial verdict goes to the president and the judge advocate general. I mean, it was normal to prepare a summary, but it's two things. One, the judge advocate general was the same judge advocate general who prosecuted the case, and the summary was not fair at all. And to answer the question somebody might ask, did Lincoln read the court transcript? He said he did, but it was 900 pages in an unknown hand to Lincoln. He had the transcript at most 2.5 days. He's got a lot other things going on at the time. So I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, maybe he skimmed it. But if he just wouldn't have time. And if he did read it carefully, like the lawyer he was, and then still upheld the finding, that would not be a good look for honest aid. Yes.
So what was Porter actually convicted of? Because wasn't treason actually on the table at one point, which would have caused panic?
I don't think they specifically had no, they didn't have a specific charge that said, and he committed treason. Treason was in the mix though, but there's no, we don't know what the court members said in their secret deliberations when they reached their verdict. From what I've read, it doesn't appear that execution was ever seriously considered. But yeah, I mean, if you carry the prosecution's case, if they believed its case, if you carried it to its logical conclusion, Porter should have been shot. Guess he would have been shot. That's
The judge advocate got to submit his summary to the president.
yes.
Did the defense get to submit anything to the president?
No. The defense didn't even know what Holt had submitted. Because it wasn't a closing, well, it really was. It wasn't a closing argument per se. Lincoln, I think Holt would have done it anyway, but Lincoln asked Holt to, he asked in a funny way, he asked him to revise the proceedings, which obviously meant provide him with a review, a summary of the proceedings. And Lincoln was inflamed. He was inflamed because his son, Robert, I believe, Robert later said that he walked in on his father in the executive mansion, and apparently Lincoln had just been reviewing the Porter case and presumably Holt's summary, because Robert said, his father said, in any other army, Fitz John Porter would be shot, and he should be shot. So he was mad. Yes, sir.
So what was the basis for reinstating his rank? I mean, what finally tipped that in the direction?
The Schofield Commission. The Schofield Commission when I say they took a fresh look at the case, it's not that they just looked at the record. They brought in witnesses. And it turns out that not only did they discover that Longstreet was on the field, okay, that doesn't necessarily exonerate Porter, but they discovered things like I referred to the 4:30 order. At the court martial, the testimony was from the prosecution was that Porter had received the order, the 4:30 order to attack in plenty of time. Plenty of daylight left to execute that order. Porter denied. His witnesses said, no, darkness was falling. But Pope's witnesses said, including the messenger who carried the order said he had gotten it by, I think, 5 or 5:30 at the very latest. And if you're not going to believe the messenger, who just happens to be General Pope's nephew, I mean, who are you going to believe? By the time of the Schofield Commission, evidence had come out that the nephew, get his first name, nephew Pope, had blabbed to some friends, well after the court martial was over. Can you believe it? I actually got lost that night. I was wandering around the forest, and so his credibility, he denied that, but his credibility was destroyed. And I said that they had evidence from the Confederates. Porter brought in a local farmer who knew the roads system so well that he had actually guided Longstreet into position. And the farmer said, I know the roads, I know where the messenger started, I know where you're telling me this is where Porter was. There's no way I could have made it in under whatever he took. And I know the roads. And there was something, I mean, a lot came out in the Schofield Commission. The only thing that didn't come out is Pope. Pope would not touch that. He would not come. He would not come. He knew he was going to get skewered. He would not appear. Yes, sir.
So, when Longstreet made his flank attack, so why did Porter then try to assist Pope at that point, or where is he then?
At that point, it was really a perfectly designed and timed flank attack. I had said that the evening of August 29, Porter gets a preemptory order to move his whole force to the battlefield. So Porter has moved from the left flank, where he was actually doing good service, because the reason that Longstreet didn't launch his flank attack on the 29th is because then Porter could have hit Longstreet's flank. When Pope moves Porter to the center, and then he launched him in an assault, Longstreet is now free to do the flank attack. There had been, I don't know if it was a brigade or a division, on the left, facing Longstreet, that could have helped slow Longstreet's attack. And I think it was Reynolds, force commanded by Reynolds. And Reynolds, if it was him, had told McDowell, by the way, I appear to have a substantial Confederate force in my front. And McDowell came over and before the attack starts and says, yeah, I think you're right. There's a substantial force out there. So that's clearly why shortly thereafter, after Porter's attack fails, McDowell, our friend McDowell, decides to move that blocking force to make Longstreet's job easier, it seems. That's one of the reasons that McDowell was criticized so much. He knew there was a force out there, and he panicked, and he moved that force from the left, made Longstreet's job that much easier.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Help me with the chronology. So after Porter's removed, is that when Meade takes over the 5th Corps, or who's his successor?
Butterfield.
Okay.
Butterfield takes over. I don't think he ever leads the 5th Corps in battle. And I don't think he leads it for very long. But then, as I recall, then Meade takes over. By the way, I hope everybody appreciates the 5th Corps badge. Yes,
So was it Chester A. Arthur who finally exonerates Porter of his charges?
who appoints the Schofield Commission?
Who's the president who finally exonerates, Porter? I thought it was-
Well, it depends what you mean. I'm trying to remember who,
He finally got reinstated back.
he gets reinstated. The president who signed the act reinstating him was Grover Cleveland.
Okay.
Coincidentally, perhaps, a Democrat.
But they won't give him back pay and then he resigns. Is that what-
He retired. He retired. I forget who was the president? Oh, Hayes. Rutherford B. Hayes was the Republican, was the president who directed the creation of the Schofield Board. So he did give him back, in part because Porter lived in Morristown, New Jersey, and after the war, and you can still see his house actually. And he became friends with a neighbor who became a U.S. senator from New Jersey. Always helpful to have when you need a favor. So thank you very much. I think. Oh, that's one of my jobs. If you're interested in learning more, those are some books, and I especially recommend William Marvel's work, which is relatively new and is just an excellent biography of Porter, in addition to his court martial and its aftermath. Thank you very much for the invite.
Take some magazines.
Magazines are free, everyone. Please help me tell
Yeah, even though they said in Cleveland.
I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. Are you talking to Kevin Paul? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and Kevin, if I recall, Kevin.
I go with all my other.
That's not true.
Okay, very good. That information I feel from that as well, so they will throw off.
I mean, well, Kevin Paul.
Yeah.
See how you quote.
Yeah.
He knows, but, yeah, it's, I know, it's interesting. Yeah. The reason.
Oh, very good.
That,
It's,
the reason that, Porter extended.
Very
he
good.
probably won't show up because he's too busy, but I will.
They do tend to come.
Yeah, well, I do know they used to play